Welcome students and friends, especially those watching online. My name is Matt Bell and I'm the Director of Programs for External Affairs here at the college. I'm also responsible for the students' paper grades, so be nice to me. It's a privilege to open this second CCA of the academic year, Big Tech. Life has never been more convenient and comfortable for most of the human race, and much of that is thanks to technology. Libraries full of information have never been more accessible. Food can be ordered on a phone and brought to your door in a matter of minutes, except for in Hillsdale maybe. Money can be transferred at the speed of light, and one can finish his or her Christmas shopping in a matter of minutes, including wrapping. On the other hand, in some novel senses, life has never been worse. As our institutions are crumbling, certain information, that which is deemed misinformation or in violation of ever nebulous standards, is becoming harder and in many cases impossible to find. George Orwell's memory hole has become a reality. Our ability to communicate face-to-face has faded even before coronavirus hit us, and the world is interconnected in ways that has hurt many of our fellow citizens. A brand new secular religion with new layers of dogma being revealed each week in tomes of community guidelines has been forced upon us by those who wish to control what we can say and do. They are increasingly successful in their quest. Opponents of this new religion are silenced as heretics in the name of so-called safety, inclusion, and science. How should we think about this dichotomy? Can power be wrested back from Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, and others? Can they be controlled at all by the government? And if so, how? Those are some of the questions we addressed this week. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, and I'm not just talking about an election that is highly suspect at best. As I speak, this room is mostly empty due to the mass hysteria propagated by our media and defended by the oligarchs in big tech. Some of the world's leading epidemiologists, for example, experts who have explained the virus situation and a science-based remedy clearly in their Great Barrington Declaration, they've been muted by big tech, along with millions of voices that need to be heard in a free society. Even if many of those voices are wrong, in a free society, they must be allowed to speak. Our modern political discourse, including discourse about this pandemic, is not healthy. It is based much more in fear, more on fear than facts. In Michigan, we have been waiting for our elected representatives to challenge Empress Whitmer's abuse of power for months, and we are still waiting. Millions of people in states across the country are doing the same, in states controlled by both parties. The country and the world are in a tough spot, to put it lightly, but in many ways, we have been in tougher spots before, and some of the great statesmen and citizens have shown us the way through these times. At Hillsdale, we aim for such statesmanship, and we will fight to the last breath to continue our 176-year-old mission of educating free citizens in the liberal arts and defending civil and religious liberty and intelligent piety in the land. Hosting this conference on this subject at this time is part of that effort, so thank you for being here. The student who will introduce our speaker this afternoon is Alex Ryder. She's a junior from Marlborough, Massachusetts. Speaking of statesmen, Marlborough, studying English. Please welcome Alex to the podium.
Allum Bokhari is the senior technology correspondent at Breitbart News. A graduate of the University of Oxford, Mr. Bokhari is a 2020 Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute for the study of statesmanship and political philosophy. He has written for numerous publications, including TechCrunch, Real Clear Politics, The Post-Millennial, and The Jewish Voice. In 2018, he obtained and published The Google Tape, a recording of Google's top executives reacting to the 2016 Trump election and declaring their intention to make the populist movement a blip in history. He also obtained The Good Censor, an internal Google document admitting to censorship, Facebook's list of so-called hate agents, and YouTube's search blacklists. He is the author of Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. Please help me welcome Mr. Bokhari.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. What is big tech? What does that word mean? We use it very often. I'm going to start with the idea of big tech in the most abstract sense of the word. Big tech, as it exists today, means control. It is the antithesis of the original ideal of the World Wide Web, which was liberation, the liberation of information, the liberation of expression. The ideal behind the World Wide Web, when it was created in the 1990s, was that everyone could have a voice. All you had to do to access the global marketplace of ideas was to go online and set up a website. And that website belonged to you. No one could kick you off because they didn't like what you said. That was also by design, because the web, when it was invented, was competing with other types of online services that were not so free and open. It's important to remember that the World Wide Web, as we know it today, a network of websites accessed through browsers, was not the first online service ever created. In the 1990s, Tim Berners-Lee invented the technology that underpins websites and web browsers, creating the web as we know it today. But there were other online services, some of which predated Berners-Lee's invention. Corporations like CompuServe and Prodigy ran their own online networks in the 1990s that were separate from the World Wide Web and had access points that were different to web browsers. Unlike the decentralized World Wide Web with its network of independent websites, CompuServe and Prodigy were privately owned networks. They were open to the public, but every bit of information on those networks was owned by them, and they could, of course, kick you off for any reason. The web was supposed to be different. On the web, you had almost total freedom to set up a website or a web server, which then belonged to you. Unlike CompuServe and Prodigy, there was no owner of the World Wide Web who could kick you off. That was the idea, anyway. As we know, this is not the case today. The web today is very controlled, and the people who control it can kick you off. Despite the noble ideas that animated the early spirit of the web, it was, as we now know, captured by a handful of corporations. We all know their names: Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Amazon. Just like those old companies, they own everything you put on their platforms. It's their decision to give you a voice or not. The web, which was meant to liberate information, got us right back where we started. Unaccountable control over online information in the hands of a few powerful corporations. If we want a way out of this mess, we'll have to find a way to make the web better represent the ideals of its founding. But we can't just think about it in abstract and historical terms. Very few people used online services in the 1990s, whether it was Tim Berners-Lee's World Wide Web or CompuServe. But everyone uses them today. You can't not use them. Businesses depend on them. News publishers depend on them. Politicians and political activists depend on them. Today, big tech doesn't just mean control over online information. It means control over politics. It means control over news. It means control over commerce. And how are they using that control? Well, if you've been following the events of the past 2 weeks, which I assume you all have, what the big tech companies have been doing to Breitbart News, to the New York Post, and to President Trump, the leader of the free world, it's quite obvious what big tech's priorities are. And that brings me to my second definition of big tech as it exists today. Big tech is an election-stealing machine, more powerful than any other in American history. Now, that may sound alarmist, but having investigated the tech giants for over 4 years as senior tech reporter at Breitbart News, having researched and published a book on the subject, and having spoken to sources and whistleblowers from Facebook, Google, and Twitter, I don't consider it an exaggeration to say that if the technologies of Silicon Valley are allowed to develop to their fullest extent, without any oversight, without any checks and balances, that we will never have a free and fair election ever again. If you think that's an exaggeration, Let me tell you what one of my Facebook sources told me in an interview for the book. This is his quote. "The plan for polarization is to get people to move closer to the center. We have thousands of people on the platform who have gone from far right to center in the past year. So we can build a model from those people and try to make everyone else on the right follow the same path." I'll just say that again. We can build a model from those people and try and make everyone else on the right follow the same path. The idea becomes even more sinister when you start thinking about it. The first thing you have to consider is that these tech companies know everything about you. They know what your likes and dislikes are. They know what issues you're interested in. They know the websites you read and the videos you watch. They know who you voted for. They know if you're a Democrat or a Republican or an undecided voter. If you so much as search Google for a recipe, they know that. If you're searching for Hanukkah recipes, they'll know you're probably Jewish. If you're yelling about the Yankees on social media, they'll know you're probably a Red Sox fan. If you're visiting conservative websites, they know you're probably voting Republican. If your smartphone is on, they know where you are. They know your location. They know who you work for. They know who your friends are. And what my Facebook source has revealed is that big tech also monitors how our beliefs and behaviors change over time and what affects that change. They want to know the types of content that can change our beliefs and behavior, and they want to use that to manipulate our political opinions. It makes perfect sense when you think about it. They've done this openly for a long time to manipulate consumer behavior, to get us to click on an ad or to buy a product. If you use any of these platforms for an extended period of time, you've probably encountered the very creepy phenomenon where you're searching for information about a product or a service, say a new microwave, and then moments later adverts for microwaves start appearing on your screen. Why wouldn't they use that exact same technology to change our political opinions and our political behavior? They have every interest in doing so. The question of who holds political power matters to these companies, much as it does to every other company. The party that's in power determines whether they're going to get government contracts, whether they're going to get tax breaks, and how the industry is regulated. So they have an interest in controlling us. They have an interest in controlling our politics. And there's currently no oversight or regulatory regime preventing them from doing so. To understand how devastatingly effective big tech's manipulation could become, consider the feedback loop. Because big tech is constantly collecting data on each and every one of us, they can conduct tests to see what kind of information has the biggest impact on us. Let's say they put a negative news story about a politician in front of us, and it has no impact. We don't click on it, and we don't read it. They detect no change in our behavior or the kinds of political opinions we hold. So they put another article in front of us, and another, each time monitoring to see if we actually click on it and read it, and if we go on to read others like it. Eventually, they will find the ones that hold our attention and impact our viewpoints. The system constantly improves. Not only does it improve, but it becomes undetectable. It's already undetectable. What determines what appears at the top of your Facebook feed, or your Twitter feed, or your Google search results? Are the websites and the posts that you see there, are they there because they're popular, because they're viral? Are they there because it's what you're interested in? Or are they there because big tech wants them to be there? Because they want you to see it? Because they've gathered data that tells them it's going to have the biggest impact on you, or that it's going to nudge your political opinions in their desired direction? We don't know. How can we know? What we do know is that big tech openly censors on behalf of its political allies. Google, for example, shut down Breitbart News' visibility on search, cutting it by 99% in 2020, compared to the same period in 2016. It cut our visibility on searches for Joe Biden to 0. And we discovered that, by the way, by using Google's own analysis tools. They didn't even care that we knew about it. Twitter, another company, in the middle of the most disputed election result in living memory, Twitter is censoring the President of the United States as he airs his concerns about the voting process. They were doing that before the election as well. And one analysis found that Twitter's censorship of the president cut engagement on his tweets by over 80%. Let's look at Facebook. We've got Republican voters up and down the country, including here in Michigan, organizing rallies to demand election integrity. On Facebook, a page called Stop the Steal was set up to encourage those rallies. It gained over 300,000 members in less than 48 hours. Facebook, of course, banned it. That is election interference. That is deliberate suppression of voters, deliberate suppression of news outlets, and deliberate suppression of the president. Now, that would be alarming and outrageous enough on its own, but the silver lining is that we can see this kind of censorship. It's the invisible things that these companies do that I think are even more troubling. We've already covered how they can nudge our political opinions. Now let's consider how they can kill entire political movements and do so without being detected. One big tech concept that everyone needs to know about is quality scores. Every big tech platform, whether it's Google, Facebook, or Twitter, has some version of the quality score, although they all use different names for it. I first heard about quality scores from someone who worked at both Google and Twitter. The quality score is how big tech's algorithms determine what appears at the top of your search results, or your Twitter feed, or your Facebook feed, etc. It's a numerical value that goes up or down based on what big tech's algorithms consider to be indicators of quality. Now, in the past, this score was used for fairly benign purposes. If your website or your post contained viruses or malware or spam or copyrighted material, well, these tech companies don't want to put that in front of users, so they train their algorithms to recognize that kind of content and suppress it by assigning it a very low quality score. That meant that, posts with viruses would appear on the 10,000th page of Google or be eliminated altogether. Fair enough. But over the past 4 years, big tech has decided that there are a bunch of other things that should determine your quality score. Very political things. Today, these algorithms are asking questions about websites and Twitter posts and Facebook posts. Questions like, are you posting links to so-called authoritative news sources like CNN or to independent blogs and websites? Are you posting misinformation? Are you posting hate speech? Are you challenging official narratives on COVID-19? Do you have an opinion about the fact that Black Lives Matter and Antifa can gather in public and destroy cities without concern of COVID, but you can't gather in your own chapel? You'll have to keep those opinions to yourself, otherwise it might just lower your quality score. On social media platforms, algorithms also analyze your network, who you follow, whose content you share. So, the algorithms will be asking, do you follow a bunch of accounts that were once banned for posting hate speech? Do you comment on articles that contain so-called hate speech? If you do, your quality score might be lowered. Your website might be buried in search results, as Breitbart News is on Google. And they won't tell you this is happening to you, of course. They won't tell you what your quality score is. You'll have to figure that out for yourself. You might have already noticed, based on what I was saying, but Silicon Valley's quality score is starting to sound indistinguishable from China's social credit scoring system. Just as in China, if you defy the values of the ruling elite, your score will go down. You will be punished, you will be suppressed, and it will all happen silently, without your knowledge. Now, China is a totalitarian place, and the people who want to pivot US foreign policy priorities away from Russia and the Middle East and towards China are, I think, absolutely right to do so. But I'm always a little amused by American politicians who think we aren't already becoming very similar to China. Yes, it's true, China's ruling elites are totalitarians, and they suppress dissidents. But America's ruling elites are becoming totalitarians, and they also suppress dissidents. And like the Chinese, they now have the totalitarian technology to help them do it. That technology becomes even scarier when you combine it with the fact that big tech is able to detect entire networks of people and entire political movements. There's a whole field of computer science called network analysis dedicated to precisely that, identifying groups of people with shared interests, who read similar websites, who talk about similar things and similar political issues, have similar habits, and follow similar people on social media. And big tech is also able to detect when information is flowing through those networks. If there's a news story or a post or a video that's going viral among conservatives on the platforms, they'll know about it almost instantly. And their systems to detect virality are only growing more sophisticated. If big tech is able to detect when a piece of information or a cause or a movement or a person is starting to attract viral attention, they can shut it off. That's what they tried to do to the New York Post when it published blockbuster stories about Biden family corruption. We can take comfort in the fact that it was not very successful in that instance, but keep in mind they don't have to tell us that they're doing it. We may have noticed when they did it to the Post, but how many other times have they done it? We'll never know. Big tech's ability to detect virality and silently suppress it could not be more important. If it grows sophisticated enough and undetectable enough, big tech will have the power not just to suppress existing political movements, but to anticipate and prevent the emergence of new ones. As I said, if big tech's power is allowed to develop to its fullest extent, there is no more democracy as we know it. There are no more free and fair elections. The political playing field will be irrevocably tilted in their favor, and there will be no going back. The good news is there's a very simple way to rein the tech giants in, and it's this. Every filter that big tech creates on First Amendment protected speech, every single one of them, needs to be optional to the user. Not only that, but big tech companies should have to prove that users opted into their filters. So if they make a filter on, say, hate speech, they should have to prove that their users chose to switch it on. And they should always have the ability to switch it off. The same with misinformation, the same with conspiracy theories, the same with filters designed to put so-called authoritative news sources in front of you. Even the same with more mundane filters like relevance and timeliness and popularity. Nothing must be left out. If users want to filter their feed solely by the most popular websites or the most popular users, they should be allowed to do so. And if they turn a single filter on your behalf, or even if they try to nudge you into turning one on, I think they should be immediately stripped of their Section 230 privileges. Because if you accept a standard as anything less than this, they will impose their filters upon you and use that to manipulate and suppress your opinions. The ultimate goal, I believe, should be an open marketplace of filters, where any third party can design a filter that you can then plug into Facebook, Google, or Twitter. That would give people the maximum amount of choice in their online experiences. And more importantly, it would completely rob big tech of its power to shape our opinions and our behaviors. It's very important that we do this, and also that we prevent them from banning certain users on our behalf. If we want to filter a particular source or a person out of our feeds, we should have the option to do that, but it shouldn't be done on our behalf. And it's important that we end banning for First Amendment protected speech, because the alternative is what I call digital serfdom. Serfdom is a system in which serfs own nothing, not even the place where they live or the clothes on their back. And the landowners own everything, including the serfs. Now, Western society has done a great deal to constrain the power of landlords. If you own a physical store, your landlord can't simply evict you from your property because he doesn't like the political slogan on your hat. He'd need a court order first. And if he evicts you for such spurious reasons, you'll be able to sue him. In the world of big tech, however, the situation is much different. Your entire business could be based off a Facebook page, or a YouTube account, or an Instagram account. And that is the case for many types of businesses these days, including independent journalists. But you don't own any of it. They can take it away whenever they want, whenever they like, with no court order, with no due process. And they have done this to many people. Entire livelihoods have been destroyed overnight, sometimes for political reasons, and sometimes because a big tech company just felt like changing their algorithms. They don't have to tell you that they're going to change their algorithm either. They don't have to tell you that they're going to kill your livelihood with the push of a button. They can just do it. And that's something, I think, that really goes beyond politics, beyond partisan politics. It's so transparently unjust that I think you could even get Democrat voters to start caring about it. after they're done celebrating the latest right-winger to get censored. Once they've done that, they might realize that they're at the mercy of these big tech platforms too. We all are. The World Wide Web was meant to liberate us. It has, in fact, done the opposite. We are more controlled than ever before. We are moving towards a world where everything valuable to us is owned by a tech company, which can take it away from us at any moment. That is what big tech is at the end of the day. Not just control over information, but control over everything. Control over our elections, control over our movements and causes, control over our livelihoods. And I think the most pressing question of the moment is, how are we going to take back that control? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bokhari. Directly following the lecture, Mr. Bokhari will be signing his book upstairs, and the book is called Deleted: Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Seal the Election. We now have time for a few Q&A sessions, so if you have questions, please make your way to the microphone.
Thanks for coming. My question is, why has big tech aligned itself against the right wing, particularly the populist right to begin with? Why is the populist right such a threat to them?
Well, I'd say many reasons. First of all, simply the culture of Silicon Valley companies is extremely left-wing and growing more so. You have to remember they all recruit out of college campuses that are very different to Hillsdale, full of left-wing indoctrination. So I think that's the most basic reason. But there's also, a very cynical reason, which is that many of these companies are deeply tied to the Democratic Party. We did a story at Breitbart a few weeks ago about Facebook's global content regulation manager. She had some title of that nature. And when we looked into this person, it turns out she was formerly the top Ukraine advisor to Joe Biden when he was vice president. Google as well, hundreds of employees went between Google and the White House and the federal government during the Obama years. And Google's chairman, Eric Schmidt, was also appointed to a Pentagon Advisory Council by Obama's Defense Department. So a lot of these companies have a vested interest in a Democrat administration and electing Democrats in a way that they don't with Republicans. The other thing is, I often hear this argument that, well, tech companies and all corporations should be nice to Republicans because, Republicans are promising them tax cuts and deregulation. But I think that's precisely why they're not nice to Republicans and conservatives, because they don't fear them as much as Democrats. They know when Democrats say they're going to regulate a company, they will follow through on that threat, which is why they so often succumb to bullying from Democrat politicians. Any other questions?
I am to remind students that you will receive, or you are eligible for extra credit if you have a good question. Eligible. Good questions. Great questions. We'll start on this side.
Yeah, you talked about the Section 230 protections, about removing them. Can you explain what those are?
So Section 230 is a law that is critical to these big tech companies. It was passed in the 1990s. And what the law essentially does is it makes tech companies immune from defamation lawsuits related to the content that they host. So you can't sue Twitter because of a post that a Twitter user made, even if that post if it's defamatory or anything like that. You can't sue Twitter for that. You can only sue the Twitter user. And if tech companies didn't have that protection, then they'd just be overwhelmed by all these defamation lawsuits because they can't control and monitor all of that information at once. So it's a law that's very critical to the tech companies, and the argument for reforming it is that tech companies are behaving less like platforms that host content and more like publishers that decide what content is put in front of you. So if the tech companies are deciding what content is put in front of you, it's probably fair that they should be legally liable for that. So you can't sue a library because a book defames you. You sue whoever wrote the book. But if the library is, shoving the book in your face or only stocking copies of that book, then I think you can probably make a case for that. I think what needs to be done with Section 230 is that liability needs to be tied to certain standards. So platforms that want this special legal immunity that no other type of company has should have to behave like platforms, simply hosting content instead of picking and choosing what we see.
Question on the speaker's right.
Thank you so much for coming. I have a question about like the big tech companies. So the reason they have so much power, I'm assuming, is because they have a little bit of a monopoly in those areas. Is there any way to deregulate the market in such a way to make it appealing to competitors who might be able to use these filters and therefore eliminate some of that power, both eliminating the deadweight loss that's created by the monopoly, but also in a non-regulatory way, allowing competitors to regulate the big tech market for them? I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, they certainly are monopolistic in a very important sense, in that if we've seen multiple examples over the past few years where someone tries to create a sort of free speech competitor to, say, Twitter or to YouTube, and what happens is Google and Apple instantly ban whatever app it is from their app stores. And because Google and Apple control 99% of all smartphone operating systems worldwide, that's essentially excluding them from most smartphones. So they do have a very tight chokehold over the market in that sense. I think the way to go in terms of breaking up the big tech companies, which is what a lot of people talk about, is you've got to separate the platforms from the filters. I think platforms should host content, but anyone should be allowed to filter it. So anyone should be allowed to create a filter to filter Google search results or to filter a Facebook feed. Currently, it's all controlled by the companies that own those platforms, but I think that should be open to everyone. I think that will really undermine their power and create genuine competition.
Hi. As far as I'm aware, some European countries, for big tech companies, they've made it so you can purge data that those companies have on you. Do you think that'd be a viable solution for companies such as Twitter, Facebook, social media platforms?
This is another interesting solution, yes. So I think if you made data portable, so say if you have a Twitter account and you've got a lot of tweets on there and you've got people you're following, I think all of that data, including the data on who you're following and what you posted, should be portable and owned by you. So that if Twitter doesn't want you on their platform, or if you disagree with Twitter's policies, you should be able to take all of that and instantly port it onto another platform. I think that would be another way to, again, undermine the power of big tech.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. So you had mentioned that all of these big companies, Google, Facebook, et cetera, they use filters to work out things like hate speech and news reliability and such, but that it has to be proven that its users opted in. Is there a way for the general populace to see what these filters are and to potentially opt out?
Not currently, not with the vast majority of them. So internet censorship really escalated after Donald Trump won, which, big coincidence there. But before the uptick in censorship after 2016, tech companies did actually give people optional filters. So the most obvious one is Google's obscenity filter. You've got the safe search button in the top right-hand corner of Google, and you can turn that on or off. But they've decided not to do that with any of the other filters they've created, and we don't know what they are. We know that they're filtering misinformation and hate speech and fake news and COVID conspiracy theories and all sorts of new categories they've invented. They keep inventing these categories. But they don't have to tell us about all of them. They could be filtering our feeds in ways we have no idea about.
You had mentioned that you thought bans should not be possible for any company. What would you think in terms of subjects like doxing, where there's thousands of users coming from certain IP address in order to slow down sites, or spam, and for example, like YouTube channels or Twitch channels meant to limit people's ability to see stuff from companies that are doing this, where bans are the only recourse currently in order to prevent these issues from happening?
Well, you mentioned Ddos attacks. Yeah, well, I mean, that's like illegal activity, isn't it? So they shouldn't be forced to host illegal activity. But I think for all First Amendment protected activity, people should be able to choose what they see or not.
Thanks for coming. So I have a question about how you would practically move forward with your suggestions of separating the filters from the platform and things like that. Do you think that's practical for owning your own information, or do you think the companies would just give you a copy of that information and then just keep collecting it on you? Like, do you think, would your practical steps be for moving forward?
Well, I think the question of stopping them collecting information is a different one to stopping them censoring. So you could theoretically have all sorts of filters, but they'd still collect information on you. And again, if you owned all your own data, that doesn't mean that they don't have access to it. So I think the data collection question is a different one. It's certainly an interesting, but what I will say is that they'd be limited in the ways in which they could use that data if you open up the filtering marketplace, because right now they're able to use that data to decide what goes in front of you, what you see on your feed, whereas if the filtering marketplace were opened up, that would no longer be the case.
Hello. Regarding illegal activities, things like you said aren't protected by the First Amendment. I think you said that you don't think these tech companies should be forced to keep illegal content on their platforms, but should they be held liable if something is spread through their platforms? Like all that illegal activity makes its way to people.
I mean, that's a case for that. I mean, I think big tech companies have the resources to get rid of genuinely illegal material, and that's absolutely fine. Section 230 doesn't protect that kind of material. So yeah, I think that's definitely debatable. Oh, yeah.
It's two-parter. One, what's the best way that we can make Zuckerberg, Dorsey, and Brin offers? In other words, how do we attack these companies economically? Because they, in the end, they're corporate entities and they have to still make money. They're abusing that now. The related question is it possible to have a negative quality score? Because I'm sure I've got one.
Oh, 100%. It's all about negative quality scores. I mean,
Every criteria.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Criteria. I was checking the box.
So yeah, the two questions gentleman asked was, one, how do you inflict economic damage on these companies to sort of, apply economic pressure on them to make them do the right thing? The second question is it possible to have a negative quality score? 100% it's possible to have a negative quality score, and they're constantly thinking up new ways to lower your quality score, in fact, and highly politicized ways. As far as putting economic pressure on the companies, the ideal of the free market is that you have consumers who vote with their feet, and companies don't want to upset consumers, so they give consumers maximum choice. If we lived in that kind of world, that's probably what the companies would be doing, but we don't live in that kind of world. I think these companies, consider, one, their social surroundings, the pressure they're getting from their own employees, which is constant. They're constantly being pressured from below in these companies to censor conservatives. They also have to consider what Democrats will do, what a Joe Biden administration might do to these tech companies if they don't play ball and censor his political opponents. So, and that will obviously influence their profits as well. So they have all these other considerations as well. And also their own ideology. I mean, I think the leadership of Google we got that leaked tape. It's pretty clear what their ideology is. The co-founder of Google said he thought the Trump election was offensive. One of their other executives said he thought the populist movement should be a blip in history. They were also talking about using Google's anti-extremism tools in the context of the Trump movement. So yes, there's the profit motive, but there's also, as Matt was talking about earlier, this new secular religion, this woke religion, and sometimes I think in the minds of these tech oligarchs, that takes precedence.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bokhari.
Thank you.